Hey everybody, Exentrick here with another Mythic Plus video. This time on 2x speed and a 25 Throne of the Tides. Here are my talents. In case you're wondering, I'm running Convoke and Rampant Ferocity. We start off this dungeon by going to the middle of the hallway and lusting the first two packs. In these packs, the most important thing is to make sure that you get your kicks and rotate your stops that stop these casts. These casts can be quite deadly and fortified, and I wouldn't recommend getting hit by them. After that, it's pretty important that you focus the Sentinels, as they have the highest HP out of any of the mobs, notably more than the casters, so if you have any extra focus damage like your Apex Spikes, you can put them into them to help even out the packs. I talent the 1 point into Hibernate in this group, even though I don't really need it because the Paralysis, Freezing Trap, and Mind Control. It never hurts to have the backup option. When I get targeted by Crushing Depths here, I use Renewal and my Self Regrowths to help get rid of the healing absorb faster, just to help my healer. I also use Bear Form and Frenzied Regen after we have completed the past pack and I no longer need to be doing damage anyways. When fighting these Ravagers, I try to spread around evenly so that I don't get hit by anyone else's barrages or send my barrage at anyone else. I'm sure your healers will appreciate you if you can manage to spread evenly and make sure that only one person ever gets hits. It'll just reduce the healing requirement of the mob by quite a bit. While we're finishing off this Ravager, I'll just go over the group comp. This was a Beastmaster, Pharaoh, Windwalker as the DPS, a Prot Warrior, and a Disc Priest. I haven't actually seen a Prot Warrior in pretty much the entire season, so this was a new experience for me. I got invited as Key as a Pug after applying to many different groups, and it was kind of good because I had a Throne of the Tides 23 as my previous record in Fortified, so this was a good opportunity to get some extra points of rating. Now that we've made it up the elevator, we do the second hallway in the upstairs area. It's very similar to that first hallway, just a little less casters and a little less danger, though it's still important to rotate your interrupts and your AoE stops with your group, as to minimize the damage output. So far so good in this dungeon, we haven't had any deaths yet, and we're approaching the first boss. After that pack, we head to the Double Sentinel pack up ahead, and during this Double Sentinel pack, I just spend my time mostly trying to cleave down them both while keeping their HP roughly even, as to be able to proceed to the next pack as soon as possible. My Berserk comes up here, so I just send it. However, when looking at my CDs, I noticed that my Ashes and my Convoke are going to be coming up soon, and I decided not to use them at this particular point in time, because I just don't feel like there will be enough value in using them on the very last tail end of this pack. After those are dead, we can head up to the LOS store, but our healer is low on mana and needs to drink, so we'll be waiting for a little bit. The common strategy here to LOS and pull all the casters back just helps you gather all the mobs without having to run into the room and risk any pulling of any trash packs you don't wish to have, which could cause a wipe very easily. The pack size across Throne of the Tides tends to be on the smaller end because there's just a lot of casters and a lot of really deadly trash. That's part of the reason I decided to go with Convoke here as my build, because I figured it just scales a little bit better and overall against the smaller trash size, as opposed to an Incarn build that spams more Primal Wraths. As we're finishing the last caster in that group, the tank walks in and chain pulls the Ravager so that we can begin fighting them, as we only have one caster left to really be dealing with. Our tank refrains from pulling the little dogs with this Ravager after we finish off that trash pack though, which I kind of prefer because I've had a lot of keys thrown to the tank just kind of really take a hit from trying to double pull those dogs with anything else. It can be a very deadly pull. I honestly wouldn't recommend it unless you're very high communication and skill and ready to rotate stops and separates and knockbacks and all of that to keep the dogs from getting out of hand. I also have my cooldowns come up right towards the end of the Ravager, but I figure I can wait a few more seconds and spend them to burst down this dog pack a little bit faster, so that's exactly what I do. From here, our tank proceeds to the pack on the left with all the casts. This pack usually goes interestingly depending on how many AoE stops and how well you rotate your interrupts. I'm attempting to do my best with my Typhoon and my Roar and my Skull Bash. However, we do pick up our first death of the Priest. I B-res him because this is pretty deadly, and immediately the tank moves on to the big pack with the even more casters and more things to keep track of. I rotate my defensives, my renewal, my bark skin throughout this, along with my AoE stops and interrupts to keep the damage to a minimum and is to not die, and we make it through without any issues. Though that being said, the run is going pretty smoothly, and I'm thinking this is going to be a great run. We end up skipping the pack on the right and going straight to the boss. That's just how the tank has routed this dungeon. We start off the boss fight, and during the first bout with Tempest, I decided to use my Survival Instincts because it just can do a lot of damage, and I don't want to take any more damage than I need to. Unfortunately, our healer gets the first run-out mechanic and happens to die to a geyser that gets completely covered. I scramble for a little bit to try healing up before B-rezzing in a safe spot. Then, our Windwalker gets the run-out mechanic as we head into the intermission phase. Unfortunately, the Windwalker doesn't allow the Prot Warrior to pick up some aggro and just takes a melee to the face and also dies. This leaves me in kind of an awkward position because there's no safe way to resurrect somebody during this phase with all the AoEs going out. I also don't happen to notice that we are out of B-reses at this point, so I attempt to resurrect him at the end of it, but it doesn't work. So the outlook on this fight is looking worse and worse, now that we're going to be doing this with only 2 DPS left. And there's still the focus Tempest, which hits really hard, and I believe hits even more if there's less people to bounce it between. Then, to make matters worse, our Hunter gets the run-out mechanic and also just gets hit by a geyser that was completely obscured by the ground effect. If there's a way to turn out the run-out effects particle mechanic, that would be really great. At this point, I'm just trying to stay alive the best I can, rotating my stops, interrupts, healing, regrowths, pots, everything really. The outlook of the fight is just looking grimmer and grimmer by the seconds. I'm just trying my best to stay alive. Luckily, these mages go down, and then the only thing left is the Honor Guard, which isn't really a problem. Now we just have to dodge and stay alive for the rest of the fight. We finish the phase with just me alive as a DPS, no B-reses to be able to use, and the healer in the tank. So, the fight is looking possible, but not great, nor fast. Then, following in the footsteps of the Hunter and the Priest, I get Shock Blast, run out, can't see the geyser underneath me, and get hit because I'm not moving very fast in bear form. Then of course, right after that happens, the healer also gets the Shock Blast and just can't live through the hit, so we're left with only the tank left to live, and just a few % left on the boss. The tank decides to engage hero mode at this point. The Incorporeal comes out, he puts a CC on it, and just continues doing the last couple % of the boss. I'm a little tilted at this point, thinking the key might just be over, but as we see, the tank finishes the fight, and there's a very quick discussion of whether we continue, and we do. One of the party members asks if it's still possible, and I say probably not, but I stick around anyways, because why not? We have lust up for the second boss, so we're just gonna burn this boss as fast as we can, see how it's going. We stack up for the ooze drops and put ourselves against a pillar, or otherwise stop ourselves from getting knocked back too far. During this fight, I flip my Hekili over to single target mode because I honestly can't be bothered to do anything to the little ads that spawn. They're not important, they're not really part of the fight, it's just a single target fight. They will mess up Hekili, and Hekili will try to get me to hit them, and that's honestly just obviously not the correct answer, so I don't do it. I will occasionally use Ursols or a Typhoon or some other means of hitting the oozes away, but for the most part I don't usually need to do all that much. The monk has Ring of Peace, and we have slowing tar traps and various other means to keep them off of us. So yeah, we finished the boss in less than 2 minutes with that lust, which is kind of insane. I don't think anyone was expecting that boss to go down that quickly. We even have a short discussion about it in party chat. We're all focused up here as you can see, because nobody dies to any of these laser eels. We all make it through flawlessly, which is just surprising because even in other keys, I don't know, people like to die to stuff like this all the time. It's really kind of crazy. When we get down the elevator, our tank decides to pick up the Faceless Watcher on the one side and take us into the Goblin Pack on the other side. This is just the way he combo pulls this. It works pretty well. The tank has Reflect spells to help us out with the Goblin Packs, and these go pretty smoothly. Shortly after we wrap up the goblins, he goes down and he picks up the first elemental ooze thing and combos that with this Faceless Watcher as well. As the Faceless Watcher goes down, he starts creeping towards the other side so that we can go towards the Mindbender boss. We make our way across the way and start the trash pack with all the AoE stops required and the different AoE explosions that cause a lot of damage to the whole group. Unfortunately, as you'll see, we weren't quite prepared to rotate those AoE stops and stop all these Psionic Pulses, so very quickly our Windwalker goes down, and then our Hunter goes down, and then another person goes down. Luckily, during this pull, all you have to do is press release and you're right there. We moved the whole group slightly closer to the respawn point, and we just continue the fight until we beat it. The key is looking a little bit grimmer by the second, especially considering everything that happened with the first boss. I do also die here, which is unfortunate, but I just respawn and continue the fight as best as I can. Multiple times with this Convoke build, I happen to have my Convoke come up right as the Faceless Watcher is pulling me in, which feels kind of bad because then I have to run out of range during my channel. So this hallway kind of just works out to dodge everything on the floor hallway. You have the Faceless Watchers pulling you in, you have to dodge their circle, you have the Faceless Spheres casting lines, you have to dodge that. And then with the other little things, you have to just make sure they don't get off as many of the channels that you can stop. The Faceless Seers are susceptible to all forms of CC, so that you can use Typhoon, War, Interrupts, whatever to stop them from being able to do their Mind Flay. While we're double pulling these double Faceless Seers and double Watchers, I'm putting most of my damage as best as I can into the Watchers as they have a much higher HP bar, and they're what's really barring our ability to move forward with the dungeon towards the boss room. As soon as the Faceless Seers die, we start creeping ever so slowly towards the boss room and the next group of these minions that cast this AoE explosion. With this AoE explosion fresh on the mind of the Disc Priest, he puts down a big bubble for us all to sit in so that we hopefully just don't die like we did last time, because this run back is a lot longer away and not as viable to just chain Death Run. And that actually works rather well. So our healer's at very low mana, and we have to wait a little bit for him to drink up before we can start the boss. With this boss, the only thing I really care to be aware of is when I have a flame touch on me that just happens to be going a little long, meaning I'm not going to get dispelled, and I need to push in defensive of some form or renewal or otherwise heal myself, because it can tick quite hard. The totems also come out, and we can switch to those and hopefully have Feral Frenzy up, though I don't particularly attempt to line up any particular combo or CD with those. If you have multiple melees and you're somewhat stacked for the Earth Flurry and moving together, you can reduce the total area that you have taken up, but this mechanic is largely forgettable and easily avoidable for melees that can move while using all of their abilities and don't have to worry about casting in place. So there's nothing left to say about Phase 1, but I do happen to have Convoke come up at about the same time that the Earth Flurry totem comes out, which is great because it just dies really quickly. Then we phase the boss into Phase 2, and I hide behind this pot. The Incorporeal comes out, so I turn and cast Hibernate Ad to make sure that it doesn't go off. And then we finish the boss in almost equally fast of a time as the previous boss, so we're really blitzing these bosses down after messing up the first one pretty badly. Unfortunately, this is a fortified Throne of the Tides, so the rest of the dungeon is actually the rest of things to be scared of. The goblin packs up here, along with the double elementals, can be quite deadly and can just brick runs entirely. We only have 8 minutes left on the clock, so we have to have pretty much this entire rest of this dungeon go flawlessly. We have a few minutes to do the rest of the trash packs, and a few minutes to do the boss. If at all possible for the elementals, it's best to burn the extra little ad things right after the elemental finishes Swell. That way the dot will drop off right before you get hit by Swell again. Well, not dot, but I guess the debuff. The next pack after this guy is truly going to make or break the run, so I'm lucky and I happen to have my Convoke, Ashes, and Feral Frenzy window coming up just in time to do this. While we're still back clearing the little corruption trash, our tank runs forward to start the pack. I don't think anyone was quite ready for this, maybe the Windwalker, but unfortunately, because he was so ready for it, he also gets targeted by a lot of Aqua Blasts and dies. And even though I try my hardest to stay alive, I also die, and now I have to run back. So I enter cat form and prowl, and speed myself up so that I can get back to the fight quicker. As I get to the fight, I manage to use my Typhoon and War to stop some of the cast rotations, but unfortunately still get targeted and die again. Though this time, by the time I get back, the pack is finished and we are moving on to the double elementals, so things are going pretty well as far as that's concerned. We have like 4.5 minutes left on the timer, and we killed the other bosses in like about 2 minutes or less. With Lust coming up here, we should be fine to complete the dungeon. So even with all of that stuff that happened on the first boss and finishing it with only the tank alive, the key is looking a lot less grim than it did in the earlier segments of it. With all the real trash gone, all we have to do is finish off these little guys and let our healer get their mana back. Then we can kill the last boss. We have about 3.5 minutes left on the timer. With Lust, I think we're gonna be fine. I'd say the most important thing on this boss is that whenever you get the little oil spots or whatever, you overlap your circles just about as much as possible and overlap them with any existing stuff from after the ad spawn. This will allow you to clean up all the area a bit faster, because if you let any of these go in between cleanup phases, the fight just becomes way harder for no reason. It's also worth noting that there is a weak aura out there that it turns off the particle density so that Ozumat himself doesn't have like a massive skirt trying to obscure your view of where the ground effect currently is. This helped me a lot, because when I first did this fight, the first couple times I ran this dungeon before I got that weak aura, I just genuinely couldn't see the ground anywhere near the Ink of Ozumat portion of the boss. The first phase of this boss is the only real phase, as the last phase is just to beat the boss down with a massive buff, and it goes pretty well. Anyways, we finished the key with 1 minute and 13 left on the clock, and feral damage is the top DPS. I get plus 11 points, so everything was pretty good here. 18 deaths, and if you've watched this far, could you please like, subscribe, comment with any questions, and thanks for watching!